This is the ESPN Prod Pod.
What's going on, everybody? You are listening to the ESPN Prod Pod. I'm your host, John McLeod. Shout out to my producer, Kiki, who is amazing and always got to show love every time I get a chance. This is the podcast that goes behind the scenes on the content you love, the people that create it, and everything in between. Today, we have the man himself, my man, Gustavo Coletti. What's going on, Gus? How are you?
Oh, man, that's quite an introduction. That's like Bruce Buffer level type of introduction, man. I should have you like recorded, and every time I wake up in the morning, just start my day like that. I feel like I can tackle the world, man. I'm doing good. Thanks for having me. It's pretty cool to be here. I appreciate it.
Well, Gus, you are our guest of honor today because you are one of the most amazing people here at the company. And we're going to get into why. I know it may be uncomfortable. We love to show people love here on the Prod Pod. But I know it's a little weird, but that's how we want to big you up because you're doing amazing things. Gus, we are in Hispanic Heritage Month, and we're diving straight in. And you are one of the producers and one of the leaders of this initiative. Talk to me about why this is so important to you.
Yeah. Well, for the second year in a row, I've been asked to sort of lead the initiative, and there's two reasons why I jumped on the first time and said, actually raised my hand and said I can do it a second time. One, I truly believe in servicing Hispanic fans, right? Like, I think we're still quite misunderstood. I still believe we're underserved. So, for all the things that I would sometimes complain about, this is my chance to like walk the walk, right? So that's probably the main reason why I did it the first time. The second time, because honestly, like I got to meet and work with some of the most amazing people I've ever met. Not just in the line of broadcast or television production. So why wouldn't I want to, have weekly calls with some of the coolest, most amazing people that I can reach out and connect with. So that's how I get myself into this mess.
No, I love that because it just shows the level of camaraderie, your willingness to step up. What's your role at the company and how long you've been at ESPN?
Yeah, so I just turned 13 years at the company. Thank you. I am now a senior managing producer in the features unit. I've been overseeing content for about the last 5 years or 4 and change. What I do is I run point on features that relate to 3 different areas. Deportes or bilingual, boxing, top rank, and UFC. So I wear those 3 hats in working with producers. What I used to do before is going out into the field and creating this content. Now I get to work with them, sitting down with them, ideation, working logistics. When they come back from the shoot, talking about structure, script, sending notes, a lot of notes, which if you ask anyone from my team, they'll tell you that I'm known for sending a lot of notes. And just sort of see that great story come to life and then just put it out into the world. That's sort of my day-to-day job. I help tell stories. Like my job, I get paid for helping tell stories. I mean, I pinch myself every day. Like, I never thought, well, I knew this was a gig, but I never knew it was like such a fun gig. So I think I have the best job in the world.
See that you know why I love that, Gus, and I love that you went there. It's because I know our viewers can see it and our listeners can hear it. You have a joy for what you do, and that shines through in your work. Speaking of your work and speaking of your ability to tell stories, when you think about telling stories, where did that come from? Where did that passion for telling stories come from?
Yeah, well, ever since I was a kid, I've been meaning to tell stories. I fell in love with film, and I wanted to be a filmmaker. I loved science fiction films. My dad always showed me movies, would take me to the movies when I was a very kid. He would show me adult movies, like, grown-up movies, not adult movies, grown-up movies when I was a very young kid. a good friend of his who was a filmmaker himself once brought in some books that he bought, and he was taken to Brazil about the making of Star Wars and the making of Indiana Jones. And I saw that, and I was seeing, you know, back in the days, they would create, you know, actual cities out of cardboard and whatnot. And I saw that, and I'm like, this is amazing. Like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. You know, I want to, you know, go to the far end of the galaxy, right? So I've always wanted to be a filmmaker. When I was in college, I took a class on documentary filmmaking, and it blew my mind, you know, because I realized that the most fascinating stories weren't necessarily on the margins of the galaxy, but they were on the margins of society. And wherever you turn, I started to see people, and I started to see stories, and I'm like, someone needs to tell this story. You know, someone needs to bring this to life. I want to be the person to do it. So it was a 180, man. Like, that really had a profound impact on me. And, you know, when I started, you know, learning the craft, I was, you know, I was still in college, but I was editing, and that started to pay my bills, and I loved sports. So, you know, it was almost like a no-brainer that I took an internship in a sports network. It was a Spanish language network, but I asked to be in the sports team. And then slowly that passion of telling, you know, stories around us sort of found its way in telling stories in the world of sports. And I never looked back. You know, I've always been involved in some capacity. I worked on and off with sports. You know, I did music and entertainment, some social issues, which is something it's very dear to me. But, you know, it was really always within the lens of sports that I was able to, you know, live my life and develop my career. So that's what led me to ESPN, and that's why I'm here. And so for me to be doing the job that I dreamed I would do when I was, 21, 22 in college, I mean, like, it's just, I wouldn't believe you if you tell me back then, like, yeah, man, when are you going to be working at ESPN and be helping tell these stories? I'm like, nah, you're kidding. Like, this is just, no, it doesn't happen to someone like me, you know?
No, that's an incredible story for several reasons. The first is you were dedicated to this from the beginning, and you fell in love. It goes without saying, when you fall in love with something, it changes how you look at it, how you address it, how much energy you pour into it. You fell in love with this craft years ago, and it transitions all the way through your life. The second thing is, I love how you went through the process and you went through everything. So you learned everything, and then it kind of helped build and hone what you wanted to do from the beginning, which tell the story the correct way. Guys, I want to know, where are you from, and how did where you're from help you craft the stories that you craft today?
Yeah. Well, I was born in Argentina. I was raised in Miami. I lived most of my young life in Miami until I moved to the Northeast 13 years ago. You know, living in Miami, you're kind of like in a cultural bubble, right? So, you know, you rub elbows with your DNA, you know, you rub elbows with your Latin American neighbors. But you also get, and you get to see and experience perspectives that were foreign to me. As I grew older and I started leaving that bubble and getting myself into other bubbles, right? Like from Argentina, so we grew up in a neighborhood, not even a neighborhood, but in a community full of Argentinians. Like my first girlfriend was from Argentina, my best friends were from Argentina. I would still read, you know, I would get magazines from Argentina, and that's how I would read about soccer and sports. Yeah. And then as I started to, like, you know, sort of grow up and started to leave those bubbles and go into, like, you know, the Colombian bubble, Venezuelan bubble, Brazilian bubble, Dominican bubble, Cuban bubble, like all of a sudden, like the world just opened up to me. And I started to see a lot of the injustices that happen to people like me, right? So again, through the lens of sports, which, you know, I always say that whenever we're able to do a human interest piece that touches on a social issue and put it on SportsCenter, like I would tell myself when I was the one producing it, but I would tell the producers that I work with, like I high five them. I'm like, you just realized that you're able to sneak in a story on the history of the slavery in Latin America on SportsCenter. Like, do you realize what you were just able to do? So seeing that sort of helped me understand that I also need to, there's a power with telling stories. How do you use that power? Yeah. You know, how do you use your platform? So that made me, I don't want to say advocate because that's too big of a word. It's too mindful. I don't think I thought about it that way, but I wanted to tell the stories of the people that were, you know, struggling in different ways, whether it was, you know, immigration or political refugees, whether from one side or the other, people who were struggling to get healthcare, education, things that happened to my family, right? So those are things that sort of shaped me and how I saw the world and things that drew my attention. And I think to today still resonates, and I'm always drawn to those stories. Those are the things that I pick up when I read an article or see something, and I just see something. Like, wait, what's this all about? You know, what's this all about? And that's how I find, some focus on the stories that we do, and that's how I, sort of try to, tell my team to be on the lookout for as they're researching stories.
Incredibly powerful. That right there, you're helping me transition to my next question, because I want to pick your brain as to how you tell those tough stories. Because Gus, let's be honest, that history is uncomfortable to watch, to listen to, and to relive. Even if you weren't around, to hear that that's how life was, and then compare it to what's happening today, that's tough to deliver. As a storyteller, how do you deliver those tough stories?
Every story has its own challenge. I wish I could tell you that there was a one-liner that's just think about this. This is your Northern Star, and it will guide you through this process. Every story has its own challenges. I say that I learned, but I still learn. I work with people from who I learn a lot. And one of the things Chris Conley said that resonated, it's at ESPN, we always look for clarity. So when we tell stories, we want to make sure that we're clear, and that translates in how we approach the subject and how we then represent that on the TV screen. I've, even as a producer, I would have to sit in front of people who've lost sons, young children, brothers, fathers, colleagues, and you need to sit down and they're pouring their hearts to you. So I can try to empathize. I empathize with them, but I will never understand what they've gone through, right? So by me going in there and saying, I want to hear your story, and I want to be able to tell your story, whatever that is, whether you lost, 3 out of 4 children, whether you just lost your son to a concussion, or whether you're dealing with a team that has just gone through one of the worst mass shootings in U.S. history. And I wasn't necessarily a part of the production. I wasn't on the field with them, but our team, when we talk about that, how do we approach this? We try to come in with an open heart, an open mind, and say we want to learn. We want to hear your story, and it takes a while to build that trust. It's not easy, especially when someone has gone through trauma. A lot of them still going through trauma. So we just try to be honest and clear, learn from them, and how can we then convey what we've learned from them, and how can we tell their story in a way that's clear and honest.
Those stories are not easy to tell. They're not easy to relive. And most importantly, they're not easy to recreate, because that's the responsibility that you've taken on. And you've recreated so that we can all understand what happened, what is somewhat still happening, and how we can get through it together as a society. Gus, you have led the Hispanic Heritage Initiative for ESPN, several times. When you think about this journey, what are some of the things that come to mind that, from when it started to where it is now?
First of all, I'm still in the process of the second year. So I think once I get through it on October 16, you and I can have a beer and I can tell you how I feel then, Um, but, the one thing that I can tell you from working with an HHM last year and an extension of some of the projects we had with HHM that evolved and, that sort of finished in February and then we picked it right up, is understanding that I am not alone. That I'm not alone in my own emotions. I'm not alone in my own feelings. I'm not alone in how I see the world. I'm not alone in how I see myself. I'm not alone in how upset I am at injustices. That I'm not alone in trying to make a difference. And before, it's crazy because the pandemic, like we're all working from home now, right? But I think since the pandemic, I've gotten so much closer to colleagues because you can leave all the BS aside, right? Like you're just having a conversation, and the fact that I'm in the intimacy of my house where I feel safe and maybe the other person feels safe, and we can have an honest conversation. And those honest conversations help us shape what we're trying to do. So what I gather most of it is like we have some of the most empathetic, talented storytellers, even though if they're not directly involved in storytelling, but we as a company, we want to tell stories that I've ever met, period. Not just in my line of work, but just period, and at least I've gotten to realize that about the people. So, now I know that when I have some crazy idea, that I can go to my colleagues and say, hey, what do you think about this? And this is what I'm thinking. And, I go there with the confidence that they will understand where I'm coming from. And they will be honest if they feel like, look, it's not going to work this way or that way, but engage with me in a conversation about maybe we could do it this other way around. So understanding that I'm not alone, that I have allies, that I have colleagues who care about the same things that I care, which I didn't realize I had those because we're always working on the surface level of things, right? Yeah. That to me has been just the most profound experience I've had at ESPN. And I wish I could tell you something much more about like, the content that we do, we realize that we can do. No, it's just sort of like what it does for me, right? At least today I can tell you that.
No, but Gus, isn't that what's important? Isn't that why we do it? That's why we tell the stories.
Yeah.
Tell those stories because, it is a form of unity and it's a form of coming together, regardless if the story makes you laugh, cry, or concerned or focused. It's our stories that we've lived collectively. We may not have went through the exact, identical things, but we can align.
Yeah.
So whether you're black, white, Hispanic, AAPI community, it doesn't matter where you are. In some way, shape, or form, we are connected. And telling stories pulls us together. Yeah. So that's why I love that. That's what your answer was. So in talking about, you had mentioned the injustices. Somos Afro-Latinos is one of the projects that you were heavy and hard on, and it's an incredibly powerful one. What are some of the biggest takeaways?
From a personal level, it's what I've learned, right? When we were having conversations about how we felt as minorities after the George Floyd murder, and how do we react to that? What is our obligation as storytellers, right? What is our obligation as communicators, et cetera, et cetera? One of the things that I started to look around, I'm like, what is the role of ESPN Deportes in this, right? Like, how are we injecting ourselves in the conversation, right? And I was seeing in other Hispanic media that their approach early on, at least, was this is their problem, right? This is a problem of this community. This is not our problem. Look at the riots, right? That's how we're reporting it. And I remember having, one or two conversations before I said, let me call, Santa Brito. And I'm like, Santa? And I think I had a cathartic moment. And I'm like, what are we doing from Deportes to show just how much racism is a part of our community, of the Hispanic communities, because we're many communities.
That's right.
We're not just, our communities are not just victims of racism, but we're perpetrators of racism. You know, you can go into any Latin American home and you will hear some of the most racist things you could ever imagine, right? And I thought, we need to have a conversation about this, because we see Afro-Latino athletes every single day on SportsCenter, on our ESPN network. We celebrate them, we put them on our fantasy teams, we wear their shoes, we consume, we celebrate their accomplishments, but do we ever stop and listen to what they feel, what they've gone through because they're Latinos and Black? And that was the genesis of, we need to bring this together, because I want to learn. I want to know. As a Latino, I see things. I can empathize, but I have no idea what's it like to be a Black Latino, whether it's in the US or Latin America. I have no idea. So I want to know, because I want to know how I can do better, how I can become a better ally, how I can tell their stories in a way that is impactful, that resonates. So what did I get out of that? Very selfishly, I'll say, I learned, man. I learned. Like, when I sat down and we had conversations with Deborah Rodriguez, from Uruguay, and she was talking about a term that she would be mentioned over and over again as a kid, things that I would hear in soccer fields, in homes and barbecues, and I never said anything. You're sitting there and you're like, it's a joke, it's, you giggle and you laugh and you're like, what kind of crappy person am I that I've sit here and I've enabled this? Because every time you're silent, you enable it, right? And I heard that, and she's done talking, and I'm like I'm in tears, because I'm embarrassed, dude. I'm embarrassed. Here's someone who's very vulnerable and telling me some of her biggest pains, and it's the pain that was caused by people that I enabled, right? So I can't be silent anymore, right? And what I got out of that is I learned and I realized that I have an obligation, to tell great stories, period, but to bring those stories into the conversation of what we want to do, because I have the privilege of sitting in those decision-making conversations. I have male privilege. I have a lot of privileges. So what can I do with that privilege to help advance conversations, to help bring different perspectives? And to be honest, I think when you bring those stories into a network like ESPN, you make the network better.
That's right.
You make it better. You're bringing in all these perspectives, and always from the perspective of, you tell me how you feel. And Afro-Latinos, Somos Afro-Latinos was just a dialogue, right? It wasn't us editing. I mean, yeah, there was some edit because it was a long conversation. We had to bring it down, but it wasn't us putting tracks and editorializing and putting music to violins and pianos and none of that. It's no, let's just hear what they have to say. It's what we needed, right? I think as a network, we needed to be quiet, listen to what these people need to say, hear what they've gone through.
Yeah.
And then hopefully you've learned from it. I know that I did, and I think everyone who took part of that sort of felt the same way. I'm pretty sure that I can say that everyone grew because of that, and a lot of them feel the same way that I felt.
The level of authenticity that says, let's not input ourselves in this. Let's let them tell the story.
Yeah.
Let's listen. And
Yeah.
I wish and hope that our listeners, that everybody at ESPN, outside of ESPN, can understand the importance of what you did. Because you did it that way, we now understand on a higher level. But so much in mainstream media is configured so that people can accept it a certain way. You let the story speak for itself. I want you to dig deep for me on this one. When you think about your legacy as a storyteller in the Hispanic community, What is one thing you want to leave behind and you want everyone to remember you for?
I never really thought about how I would ever leave a legacy. um, I I would like, if I I've often thought, like, what how would I want my daughter to see her dad's body of work, right? Like, how do I want her to? Because whenever she comes in, it's like, Daddy, let's play, and I'm like, I'm looking at a screen, or I'm sending some notes, or I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Um, I feel bad. I'm like, well, one day hopefully she'll be able to see that I did things that were important, and this is why. And I hope one day she can see those stories and she can learn as much as I did from telling those stories, right? Like, if her, and I guess, I don't know, if anyone that could see the body of work that I've leave behind, and they can learn from it, like, there isn't a better legacy. Like, I'm not a writer, I'm not an author, right? That's just not me. I'm not an architect. I don't build things. I'm not a landscaper. I am not a lawmaker. I tell stories. How can I make the smallest of impact in anyone that can see the work that I was able to be a part of, and just learn, get something out of that? Hopefully that information that they can assimilate, my daughter, or whoever, can make them a better person. And I can't control that, but at least I can put out information that I think um, they will be able to internalize, and it would stick with them. Hopefully, right? Hopefully they can look at the work and be like, man, that piece stuck with me. That moment stuck with me. If I can do that, man, like, I think my career is a success. But I don't know.
Well, Gus, let me tell you firsthand, you are on your way to a phenomenal legacy. You have already etched your name in history with the work that you've been able to do with telling stories from all over the globe, from your work in deportes to boxing to combat sports. We want to say that we appreciate you and we thank you.
Now it's time for the Fab Five.
All right, so this part is just full of fun questions. You can answer them however you like.
Okay.
Let's start
Those
off
make
with
me nervous. Those make me nervous.
why?
I don't know.
If you could pick a TV show to be your life, what show would you choose?
Ooh. All right, here's a problem, because I like end of the world films, apocalyptic films, and I like mafia films. So in any direction that I go, it would be a pretty bad representation of my life. All right, okay. So
You have to lean into it.
yeah,
Whatever you
okay. So look, in a fantasy world, right? I am Tommy Shelby from Peaky Blinders.
Okay.
All right, I am the coolest dude who is able to lead a family through the darkest of businesses, and is able to come out with just the most amazing suits, perfectly shaved, and the most stunning green eyes. That is not how my story will ever be told, but we're having fun. So, give me the Shelbys and Peaky Blinders. I'll run with that.
So, what's something that has surprised you about your career path?
13 years at ESPN. When I started working at ESPN, I remember thinking, well, this should be maybe 1, 2, 3 years. The fact that it's been 13, I would have never thought. I would have never thought. Look, I'm 13 years in the company. The fact that for a quarter of the life of ESPN, more than a quarter of the life of ESPN, I've been a part of it. I would have never thought, when I was a kid recording with VHS tapes, the 6 p.m. and 11 p.m. Sports Center, so I could watch it. Never think for in a lifetime that I would be a part of that world for a quarter of that network's life. Never in a lifetime. Nope.
How do you unpack and unwind after work? Like, what is your routine when you get out of work and you turn off that laptop?
No.
What do you need?
Well, it changes. Right now, I'm done, and I promised my wife that at 6 p.m. every day, I'm going to go for a walk with her and my kid around my neighborhood, go to the backyard. That is my go-to way of just disconnecting from everything. If I can add another layer to it, if I can just put on some jazz, I mean, jazz is my lifeline. So if I can just listen to some jazz, ooh, like that is my way of just recharging, disconnecting, recharging, rebooting, and just feeling connected with my soul again. After watching screens, so 12 hours a day, just sort of like have something go directly here, through here, just directly here.
If you could tell the story of any historical figure, who would you choose?
Um, ooh, I'm big on music. Um, I'm a huge Nina Simone fan. Huge. I don't think her life was told in a fiction way as it should have. No disrespect, but you could tell me, Gus, before you die, you get to do one, biopic on some historical figure. I'm like, sign me up for Nina, and then I could die in peace.
So, last question. If you had lots of money, what unnecessary thing would you just splurge on? You can just
Buy
walk
the,
up.
buy the Miami Heat, of course. Of course. No brainer. Here, Gus, here's a couple of billions, Splurge. Buy me my Miami Heat. Hell's yes.
You survived the Fab Five. See? It
All
wasn't.
right. You had me there on a couple though. Huh? You threw me some curveballs. Good for you. Good for you.
Yeah, can't see them coming. But you did
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. Okay. Glad. Thank you. It was fun. It was fun. You got me thinking. That was fun. That was fun.
Well, Gus, man, we want to thank you so much for being a part of the ESPN Pride Pod. For myself and my producer, the awesome Kiki, you are phenomenal and we appreciate you. Thanks for tuning in, and make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe to ESPN PR on YouTube. And you can find the ESPN Pride Pod wherever you find your podcasts.